Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Stadia and Micro Focus webinar featuring Moving COBOL Workloads to Azure. During the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into your chat box on your control panel, and we'll save it for the end of the presentation. But first, let's walk through the agenda. We're going to start today's webinar off with introductions to our presenters. After that, we're going to talk about why you should move to Azure and the benefits involved. Next, we'll go into deploying COBOL to Azure so you can see how the system works. And then we have a special treat for you. We have a live demo where you can see how all the components and how all of it works together. But you definitely want to stay tuned till the end. We have a very special offer for everyone on the phone, so you want to make sure you stick around for that. And then we'll follow it up with some Q&A and show you some upcoming webinars that we have. But first, now to our presenters. Our first presenter is Craig Marble. Craig is the Senior Director of Legacy Modernization at Stadia. Craig has been with Stadia for 7 years, and before that, he worked 16 years with our friends over at Micro Focus. Altogether, he brings 25 years of IT experience to the table along with a wealth of knowledge. His primary focus is on modernization, but he also is experienced in product management, pre-sales management, and delivery management. Our next presenter is Ed Airey. Ed is the Director of Solution Marketing for Micro Focus. Ed's been with Micro Focus for 10 years and altogether brings over 17 years of IT experience. He primarily focuses on application access, integration, and modernization, but his true expertise lies in product management and marketing, pre-sales and service delivery, and tech services management. So we're welcome to have Ed on board for today's webinar. Third, last but definitely not least, we have Michael Bleistein. He is the Principal Architect for North America Technical Services at Micro Focus. Michael comes to the table with over 24 years of experience with Micro Focus alone. Altogether, he has over 30 years of IT experience in the industry, and he specializes in modernization of COBOL applications through .NET and Java, cloud technologies, REST services using Visual COBOL. Michael primarily specializes in helping customers find solutions to their business problems. So he is kind of an expert and the go-to guy when it comes to needing solutions for customers that are in dire need of help. So we have an interesting presentation in store for you today. So let's get started. Craig Marble, I pass the mic over to you.
Great, thanks Desiree. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're very happy that you're going to spend some time with us on this topic. Just a quick introduction of who Stadia is. So we are a technology consultancy focusing on maximizing the impact of your projects while minimizing the risks to meet the business needs today. And we understand that the cloud isn't for everybody, and in reality there's a blended system of cloud and enterprise systems that you're going to be working with. So we can help with both of that. We're not just cloud, we're not just enterprise, we're really a combination of both. And clients typically choose a Stadia because we have a lot of experience. We've been around for more than 25 years. We are also nimble enough that we can provide agility and work rather quickly to pivot our solutions to meet the needs of our customers. So we have basically 4 main areas. One is on the top left, the cloud migrations. And this is moving things like your existing Unix applications or Windows applications you've had running, maybe since the 80s or 90s that you want to move into the cloud. So we can do that for you. Below that, you'll see we have a managed services operation that is managing not just your cloud environments, but also your physical on-site assets, whether it's desktops or PCs. In some cases, we will put kiosks on a customer site to provide help on demand. So, you know, you bring your laptop to the kiosk and say, it's broken, I need some help. We also do cloud development, which could be development from scratch, or maybe helping you set up your development environment, including testing services, providing software testing as a service. And then, of course, there's the legacy modernization side, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Part of what we do, a lot of what we do is the legacy modernization. We've been doing that for more than 20 years, specifically moving heavy mainframe applications onto distributed platforms, and have parlayed that into moving them to a cloud environment. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ed Airey at Micro Focus to give a quick description of Micro Focus. Ed?
Thank you, Craig. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Micro Focus and Stadia have a great relationship. We've been working together for the last 20 plus years, helping our customers modernize and transform business critical applications. Micro Focus is an enterprise software organization. We build, we sell, we support software to help organizations, again, maintain, but then also modernize business critical applications. We believe that you already have everything you need to be competitive in the marketplace. The key is unlocking the value within the complexity of your IT estate, effectively enabling you through tools and technology and practice to be able to bridge the old and the new together. So we're very excited to be here with Craig and the Stadia team to talk about why move to Azure. What are the drivers to move application workloads to this next generation cloud platform? Well, there are many, and they vary from organization to organization. For some organizations, it's about managing infrastructure costs and being able to get them under control, perhaps looking for extensibility and greater flexibility with application workloads to be able to scale to the requirements, maybe the seasonality requirements of the business. For some organizations, it's about looking at alternatives in terms of supporting existing COBOL or mainframe applications to be able to again, support them in a managed services fashion, as Craig was describing earlier. Or perhaps it's a path to embrace next generation technology. We see a lot of clients moving towards virtualization, both on-prem and off-prem, but then also embracing new technologies such as .NET and Java and being able to modernize existing applications. The cloud provides a great platform and in many ways a springboard to do just that. So let's take a closer look now at what it takes to deploy applications into Azure. Craig?
Great, thanks, Ed. So what we're going to focus on today is if you've got existing COBOL applications that may be running in Visual COBOL or maybe under some other product, but that are running in a distributed environment today. So let's just take an example that they were either developed on the distributed platform from the beginning, or perhaps they were a really old mainframe application that you've moved into NetExpress and now lives in Visual COBOL, or maybe even lives in NetExpress still today. So we will be having some other webinars later on that specifically target mainframe applications, but we're really going to focus more on the distributed COBOL applications today. So what do you need to do to get those COBOL applications deployed into Azure? Well, if you're already doing COBOL development, you've got a desktop environment for your COBOL application. So you could do one of two things. If you want to do your development in Azure, then you'll obviously want to set up development and deployment environment in Azure. But if you're going to do your, let's say, your development on the desktop and deploy to Azure for production, then you've already got your application running in Visual COBOL on the desktop environment. And you want to prepare that, make sure that you're able to edit it, compile it, and debug it successfully, and that everything is set up to, is ready to be deployed. Then, of course, the next thing you need to do is prepare your cloud environment, your Azure environment within the Azure portal. So you want to create your instance or instances and get them configured and prepared to receive the application. And what that means is installing the Micro Focus server environment and the deployment container, supporting pieces for your specific application, and configuring it much like you do today on the distributed side. If you're running Linux or Windows on a piece of hardware, or virtualized on a piece of hardware in your own facility. And again, if you're going to have you're going to create a development environment on Azure, you'll want to set that up too. And then once you've got that set up, and you've got all the pieces in your deployment area, then you'll obviously want to run through and QA and test it, and review, go through whatever process you have currently to review it to make sure that it is ready for production, and then you can cut over to it as a production environment. So what we want to do now is have Mike Bleistein, the real COBOL guru, go through the architecture deployment in Azure, and then he will move into a live demo, because that's what we really want to show you today, is the real deal. So Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Craig. So before I actually demonstrate the technology behind this, what we're looking at is on the left is what would be your current distributed platform, or maybe a representation of it. So your COBOL application could be comprised of a number of different technologies and surrounding infrastructure technology like system management tools and printing technology, databases, legacy data that could be in index files or sequential files, and you might even be interacting with a web server. And then on the right side, you have Azure, and you can see that, you know, an obvious question would be, okay, if I'm moving a COBOL application from this distributed platform that I'm currently on, whether it's Windows or Linux or Unix, and I want to move to the cloud, what technologies are going to be available to replace or take over the current functionality that I have in my application? And you can see it's a like for like transition. And the reason why, and we'll get to that, is because essentially we're working in an infrastructure as a service platform, meaning we're going from a distributed platform to from a managed hardware platform, sometimes legacy hardware, to a virtualized environment in the cloud. So that means in the infrastructure as a service, we have control by being able to put virtual machines there. So if I'm running in a Windows server environment today, I can create a virtualized environment for a Windows server there. So I'm essentially moving my existing platform into the cloud, but nothing has to change in terms of what I currently do in my application. If I'm moving from a Linux environment, I can create a virtual machine or a virtualized environment for Linux, but my COBOL application, its data files, and the existing tools, I can load them into my virtual environment. So you can see that there's no need really to replace COBOL with some other language. The COBOL is going to be there. If you're using VB or C# or other technologies, those technologies are still there because it is your virtualized environment that you're creating. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and demonstrate the technology for you. And we'll start with the concept of preparing the application. So to do that, I'm running with Visual Studio. Craig, can you see my screen with Visual Studio?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just making sure. I have two monitors here. Okay, so I'm working with my application, and we mentioned that the first steps are prepare the COBOL application locally and doing what a developer does: edit, compile, debug, and testing, and then moving to QA. So I'm doing that in my Visual COBOL environment. So we're looking at an application here that's probably a very legacy traditional COBOL application. It creates a report, and there's nothing that's not traditional about this. It reads a sequential file and generates a report. So you're looking at very traditional COBOL here, and I'm using a very modern environment to do this in those. So in this case, I'm working with Visual Studio 2015, and we have 2017 available as well. So what I mean by edit, compile, and debug, well, if we're working with COBOL and Visual Studio, I have the ability to take advantage of the editor capability. So if I'm working in COBOL, I can very quickly find out things about my application. So if I want to find out, or as I'm coding, if I have syntax errors, I can simply, as I make changes to my code, I find out right away that I have syntax errors in my code. So we have something called background parsing. What this is really accomplishing for us is removing the lag time of finding out what problems I have as I'm making changes to my code. And I'm actually speeding up that development effort. I can also take advantage of things in the editor such as IntelliSense. So if I want to move something to a variable like we just saw, I have move yes to WS, and I get IntelliSense popping up information about my COBOL application. So I have a very powerful editing capability embedded. I can also navigate around my code very quickly. So if I want to find out how a paragraph in my COBOL program is being used, I can get all references to it. I can go to the definition of it very quickly. So this is all in the effort of preparing my application. And once I've made my editor changes, I can then build this application. So here, if I want to build this, I would just right-click and do a build. Or if I want to skip right to debugging, I can go ahead and test this application. So we've gone from editing, compiling, and I can go ahead and start this and work with this application in my local environment before I ever even think about moving it to the cloud. So as I'm waiting for this to start up, it's gone ahead and realized that I had changes there, small changes. And in this case, I'm generating a report. Now, normally you might have a report running in batch mode, or you might have it kicked off possibly from a browser application. So the type of application that's running here really isn't that important. The point here is that I have a very legacy application, and I just chose to kick it off via a thick client type application. And I've worked with a number of customers who have end user type applications where they do a lot of data entry, but then they might want to run reports during the day so they can generate reports. So I want to go ahead and click on that, and you can see that now I'm in debugging mode. I can step through my code, and as I step into this paragraph, I'm opening up my data file, and I can see that my data file is open, and I can step through and watch my application run. And ultimately, if I go through and continue to go on, I'll just go ahead and run this in debug mode. And now I'm going to take this file, this sequential file that I created, and generate a report from it in the form of a PDF file. So let me go ahead and just run through that. And it's gone ahead and it's taken my report file, my data, my sequential data, and generated a PDF file. So if I wanted to see what that looks like, I can bring up another folder, and if we go into this reports, I see that I have a brand new file here, and this is what it looks like. So we're opening up a PDF file, and it looks like it's either still trying to open, or Adobe is telling me I don't have support for that kind of file. So, because I think it's actually still in locked out mode in my program. So, anyway, I've gone ahead and tested my application, and now I want to go to the next step and move it to the cloud. So before I do that, I need to prepare a cloud environment, and I want to go ahead and configure a very light virtual machine. Now, maybe I'm running and developing on a Windows workstation, but I'm going to run this in production in a Windows server. So how do I do that with Azure? So Azure has a very intuitive portal that I can use for that purpose. So if we look at the Azure portal, there are a lot of different capabilities and features here to manage your cloud environment. Being able to create services, create cloud databases. In this particular case, I want to go ahead and create a virtual machine. So I'm not going to create that from scratch here, because for timing purposes, it would take probably 20 minutes or so till I'm all said and done loading that up. But if we look at the virtual machines area, I've already got a virtual machine out there, but if I wanted to create a new virtual machine, I have a couple choices. I can take advantage of pre-existing templates that are out in the Azure marketplace. So We have one that for Windows Server. These are some of my recently used ones. And of course, if you want to create some specific ones for Linux or Red Hat, something that already has a database server loaded on it. So you have a number of choices here to create a virtual machine for the specific environment that you're looking for. The one I have created is a Windows Server 2016. And in addition, if you don't want to use an existing template here, you can, once you create that virtual machine, then you can go and put the things on it that you want. But you can also create your own virtual machine offline in the form of a virtual hard disk or a VHD file, and then you can attach that to your cloud environment using the tools here in Azure. Then there's a lot of different technologies for integrating your application. So your application, again, will look like just another Windows Server environment with an internal hard drive, a C drive, or any other drives you might create. And you can also create shared drives. So in essence, you can actually kind of extend your on-premises environment to work alongside of the cloud. So in this particular case, if I go out to the cloud, I have something that they call a storage account. And inside of my storage account, I have a shared file or a shared drive, and it's called VC files. And if I look on VC files, I actually have some data and information there. So this is actually where I'm going to deploy and move my application. And because that's a shared file out in the cloud, I can actually access it from my Windows workstation. And there's a number of ways to do that here. And one of them is Microsoft provides a storage explorer. I can also do this activity in the Azure portal, but Microsoft provides something called the Azure Storage Explorer, and that will allow me to upload the application once I'm ready to go ahead and deploy it. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead. So now that I've got my virtual machine ready in the cloud, at least with Windows Server and the pieces needed, I would need to do two things. One, install the Micro Focus COBOL server, the runtime that allows the COBOL application to run, and then the application itself. So there I'm preparing the COBOL application environment, the runtime for Micro Focus and the application. So let's go ahead and build this for release. I'm going to go ahead and change my deployment to release, and we'll just go ahead and rebuild this. And once that's done building, then I can go back to the Storage Explorer and do an upload of that application. So if we want to go to here, it's going to let me browse to the folder that I have where we just built these. And we should have some brand new files here, July 13th. And I'm going to go ahead and just select all the pieces and then do an upload. So it should come back, and it'll actually ask me to override, and I'm going to go ahead and overwrite these since they were already existing there. So let me just go ahead and click each of those, and it'll upload all those different files. So now I have brand new versions of that file out in the cloud, and I should be able to run these in the cloud. So now that I've got the application there, I would want to test this out. And in order to do that, I can come back, bring down the Storage Explorer, and how a user would get to a cloud application depends on the application itself. If it was a browser-based application, obviously they would go at it through a browser. Many thick client-type applications, customers will have them either a remote desktop in or use some kind of terminal services client. So I'm using Micro Focus Remote Desktop, and I'm going to connect in to the actual server, Windows Server that I have. And on my desktop, if I go out to Windows Explorer out here, I can see that there is my shared drive that I just uploaded. And if I do a refresh, I should see the files that I just recently put in there. And I can now go ahead and run these. And if I click on my desktop and run my batch application, and we'll go ahead and let that just run. So now I'm kind of in QA mode, making sure it works. And where that report gets generated is actually on the C drive on the actual cloud virtual machine, the Windows Server. So if I go out to the folder in my C drive, I can see that I have a new report generated. So that's me logged into the remote via remote desktop to the actual Windows Server in the cloud, and then user with authentication, or you might have different user groups. When they log in, they automatically launch this application, so they don't have to go into the Windows Server and see all these details. You could have it so they just see the application. But now that I've run that report, anyone could then access that report. So if I come back to my desktop on my local machine, I can go to the browser and refresh this, and I now see the new report that was just generated, and I can access that in the browser. So what we just saw is I went through the phases of building my application using a very modern environment, in this case Visual COBOL for Visual Studio. I was able to edit, compile, debug, and then prepare my virtualized environment. In the case of Azure, I was using Windows Server 2016 and loading the different pieces that I need for my application. So I'm building the Windows Server just as if I was building a local hardware a box in my own on premises, but I'm doing this in a virtualized environment in the cloud, picking either a template, creating a virtualized disk, and attaching that, and putting the things that I need on that disk. I'm not forced to use newer things that I already have in my application. And then being able to upload my application into that, it's now my environment. I can even connect that virtualized environment to my on-premises to make them kind of coexist as one. And we saw how I shared a drive, in that case in my Windows Server, that I could access both from on-premises, my local machine, or from the cloud. And I uploaded the application, ran the application, and then saw that application running. So it might seem like that, okay, all I did was move this from one Windows machine to another, but that's exactly what I did. That's exactly what we're doing in this virtualized environment, and that's why there's less risk there. I can take my current environment, move it into the cloud, and let the cloud infrastructure manage that. So I hope you enjoyed that presentation, and I'll turn it back to Craig.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. It's really some fascinating stuff. For the audience, this is the first time I have seen Mike do this, and it's really some pretty cool stuff, and I think really demonstrates the low risk of moving stuff from one platform to another using Azure versus Windows in a desktop environment, and then of course you get all the benefits of being in the cloud environment. So great stuff. I'll now hand it over to Desiree to moderate the Q&A. I think some questions probably while we were doing the demo. So Desiree?
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. So just a quick reminder, if you have a question to ask our experts, feel free to type it into the chat box on your screen. Now time to address some of the questions that we have been receiving throughout the presentation and demo. So the first question says, I'm looking at Amazon Web Services for application workload. Is the same approach applicable here? Mike, do you want to answer this question?
Sure. Yes, and the same approach, the same set of steps applies. The only thing that would differ would be some of the tooling. So in my presentation, I used the Azure portal where I manage my cloud items, virtual machines, any storage accounts and databases and things like that. Amazon Web Services would have their own portal. So mostly everything would be the same. The steps, preparing my application, and then preparing the cloud environment. Instead of doing that in Azure, you would do it in Amazon, and then you would go through the same steps of creating the COBOL application environment, installing the COBOL runtime, the Micro Focus COBOL server, deploying the application to Amazon, and then bringing any other needed things that the application needs, any surrounding technologies. So the only difference would be where pointing it to one portal versus Azure.
Interesting. All right. Second question. What do I do with my hierarchical data? Directing this one to you, Mike.
Okay, so if we're referring to traditional COBOL index files and Micro Focus index files, you would simply deploy those along with your application. Because again, we're not forced to go from legacy data structures, in this case, the COBOL index files or even flat sequential files. We can bring them along with it because we're moving to a virtualized window environment with the technology that we need to support our application. So we would just move that kind of data with the application. If we're talking about other types of legacy hierarchical data, then it depends on what they might be. So if it would be moving from, say, IMS, a legacy mainframe database on the mainframe, then you have some options there. You could move it, deploy it to an IMS in production with Micro Focus, or you might take the opportunity during that migration to convert or migrate to a relational database. So, Craig, would you like to add anything to that, to those comments? Because I know there's some other types that Stadia deals with.
Yeah, sure. So since you mentioned IMS, I'll just mention on the Unisys side, you've got DMS2, which is a hierarchical database, and hierarchical versus relational in terms of the way they perform and how they operate. It's kind of like beta versus VHS. Seems like relational won out on that war, and there were other reasons just besides popularity. But so what we normally do, especially for DMS2 data, but also for IMS data, we generally create a relational database from the schemas that the original database is defined from. And we will migrate the data over to a relational database, whether it's SQL Server or Oracle or DB2LUW or whatever the customer wants us to use. And it's not difficult. It has some challenges that you always have when you're working with two different types of databases, but nothing that can't be overcome with a little bit of engineering. So we've had a lot of success with that. Then, of course, the advantage of being in a relational environment is then it's easy to share that data with other applications. You don't have to have any special interpreters or just-in-time conversions to go from relational to hierarchical. So if you have other applications that traditionally have not been able to get information from your legacy databases, by moving it to relational, then it's much easier for that to happen.
Right. Next question. Do I need to convert flat files to relational? Mike, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Is it required? Absolutely not. In fact, the application that I ran, the COBOL report application I ran, actually read an existing sequential file and then generated a report file in the form of a PDF. So again, as long as we have the Micro Focus COBOL environment there, we'll still support traditional legacy data stores. So Micro Focus index files, alternate keys, indexes, all those kinds of things, as well as sequential files, all the supports there. So the answer is you wouldn't have to move them to relational. It's not a requirement to shift to a relational database. If you choose to, you absolutely could. We have very broad and deep support for a number of relational databases, including SQL Server.
Last question. How do I get started in moving to the cloud? Craig, do you want to address this one?
Yeah, so typically in any engagement, if you're going to go to the cloud or really make any kind of move, the first thing you have to do is figure out where you are. I mean, it is a journey. You're going to go from one place to another. So before you can get to where you want to go, you have to know where you are. So you got to find your place in the map and then map your way to your destination. So what we do is an analysis of the application or applications or the environment as a whole that you want to modernize. So we take a look at all the portfolios, the supporting processes, meaning your development processes, your testing processes, how many promotion levels you have, all the aspects around your existing portfolio, printers, schedulers, things like that. So it isn't just the application itself, right? It's everything that and then we map out to the destination, determine where you want to go, what kind of requirements you have, what the workload is like, what your user ecosystem looks like, and then we start mapping out the things that have to change. So, for example, you may have some pieces of hardware that will work on the platform that your source is coming from that may not have an equivalent on the target. So we may have to do some replacement there. And then you may have some components that work on the source side that won't work on the target side, so they may have to be replaced. But we always try to leverage as much as we can to keep the risk as low as possible and to keep the cost as low as possible. So then once we do that, we take code and start porting it over. It's an iterative process, always improving on itself as we find issues that apply to all of the code. Do the testing, and then some final smoke testing, and then we're ready to put it into production. So I would say that the first step is really finding somebody who's done this before and get them engaged to provide the expertise and the know-how to guide you on that journey.
All right, that looks like that is all the questions we have. But we want to make sure that we get to the part that everyone's been looking forward to, the special offer. Team members of Stadia and Micro Focus have put together a very special offer for the registrants and the people that have joined the webinar today. I want to walk you through it because this is really exciting. We are offering a value profile assessment. So what that includes is it's complimentary. It's a one-day session with both Micro Focus and Stadia experts. What will happen is there will be an application overview with key stakeholders, as well as a technical review, and then they will recommend a strategy fit. The assessment and recommendations will be provided within days of when you fill out the assessment. So in order to receive this offer, you need to contact us at info@astadia.com and just put value profile assessment, and we will make sure that we get right back to you. But this is definitely an offer you do not want to pass up. All right, next slide. Also want to let you guys know of upcoming webinars to put on your radar. We will be having a migrating Unisys mainframe to Azure and a Unisys mainframe to AWS. Also coming down the pike will be migrating IBM mainframe to Azure and migrating IBM mainframe to AWS. For more on these topics, or for more information on any of the information we provided today, if you would go to cloudgps.astadia.com and you can click on the Legacy Modernization tab, we have a wealth of knowledge on that tab that can provide you additional resources. So this webinar replay will also be available on our website on Tuesday for you to download on demand. And if you're looking for more information specifically, you can reach out to us directly at info@astadia.com. All right, well, this concludes today's webinar. We appreciate having Craig, Ed, and Mike all share their knowledge on moving COBOL workloads to Microsoft Azure. And most importantly, we appreciate you joining us today to learn more about this topic. We look forward to you joining us for our next webinar. Goodbye.